folks, Gavin Roth here with another episode of the Influencers of Sponsorship Marketing, sponsored by Elevent, makers of sponsorship software that track, evaluate, and manage all requests for partnerships. Learn more at elevent.co. An important detour for this episode is I chat with three of the leaders in the sponsorship and sport marketing education space. Three people charged with inspiring the next gen of sponsorship and sports marketers. My guests are Cheri Bradish, Loretta Rogers Research Chair in Sport Marketing at Ryerson University. Peter Widdis, Professor of Marketing and Innovation and Program Coordinator of Sport and Event Business at George Brown. And Vijay Setlur, Sport Marketing Instructor at Schulich School of Business. We discuss their respective journeys, their mentors, their areas of academic focus, the trends they are seeing and discussing with their students, and their professional development advice. Three great minds, a lively chat full of insights, stories, and a few laughs. I hope you enjoy. And for more episodes of the Influencers of Sponsorship Marketing, follow me on LinkedIn, visit Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, or check out rothrevenue.com. I'm not often the smartest person in the room, and today is definitely no exception to that. Thrilled to be with the three of you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So, my history with all of you is a little different. Cheri, I know you the least of the three. We were catching up before, but I do follow your work. I admire what you're doing at Ryerson. You wear many hats. Tell us about your career path and how you became the Loretta Rogers Research Chair in the sport marketing at Ryerson.
Thanks, Gavin. And always good to intersect with enthused colleagues in the field, Vijay and Peter. I think there's a lot of sport management professors and I'm just going to say this up front, in Ontario now and in Canada, but there's few that straddle the industry and the theory of what we do. So we may get into that, but I'm saying that now up front because Peter and Vijay do that. So I appreciate it because we're kind of fighting and banging on the same drum, right? I believe, even though we all do different things, and we'll talk about that. So my path is considered a traditional sport professor and faculty role and route. I did master's PhD and then have a portfolio that is research, teaching and service in an academic university institution. And so long story short, I graduated undergrad at the University of Guelph. I was a varsity volleyball player. For me, that was an influencer in getting into sport business because there was only 12 schools at that time in North America who offered PhDs in sport management or sport business. But it was because of the work I did in the on-court, off-court experiences that I had at Guelph that made me want to pursue something in sport. And then in 97, I came to Brock. There was 2 courses on the books and about 12 students. And so really was the first faculty hire and the founder of the sport management program there. So I was at Brock for 16 years. And then in 2013, I was on mat leave. I say that because I think it's important for the women to hear you are always balancing and probably sometimes too early, sometimes too late in life. But Ryerson posted this position, the Loretta Rogers Research Chair in Sport Marketing. It was supported by the Rogers family, who you all know, and we all know why they're important in sport. And it was in the School of Business, and I wasn't in a School of Business. And so I am fortunate during what I just described to do my master's and PhD, to also always, for some reason, and I don't know why, but just in my gut, because I liked it and I didn't really know it was important to have that industry connectivity. So I took a leave and was with the Vancouver Grizzlies in 95. So I was there at the ground floor and I knew that was important. Next year I went and worked for Nike Canada and had a longer placement with them. And so I always, A, wanted to have the connection to Canada, and B, just always to this day, feel we're only as relevant as we are relevant to the industry. And that's a soapbox comment that we can unpack a little bit.
Sure.
And so in 2013, I applied to this role and was successful in getting it. And, you know, without getting into too much detail here right now, it definitely springboarded me and opened a ton of doors. Now, I was lucky to have some key contacts, and I'll mention 2 people that were really helpful to me. We can talk about them, but I was super fortunate at that point to be colleagues with Dave Hopkinson, who he and I are came into the industry at the same point, and he was very good to me and continued to be so in that role. And obviously Dave had just taken the chief commercial
president of business at MSG Sports.
Yeah, but at that point had just taken the chief commercial officer role at MLSE, and they had a new president, and things were, you know, I think life is about timing, and I am so fortunate to have been at tables when things were happening, you know, to be at the table when the NBA came to Canada. That's a really unique time to start teaching in 97.
Seismic shift, yeah.
Quite frankly, and I know you said to be brief, but 97 is the year Jerry Maguire came out. And I believe that has something to do with the growth of our field.
Right, there's going to be listeners, Cheri, who don't know. They're going to say, where does Jerry Maguire work? Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think timing's everything. And and so because it popularized what we do and talk about.
Yeah, true. Yeah, especially the sport agent. Yeah.
But it just talked about sport as a business.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that people had, our applications without a doubt were influences when I first started at Brock because of that movie. Because parents knew
Interesting.
it. Without a doubt, you know, and I've written Lee Steinberg about it, about how I have, because
it was based loosely on Lee Steinberg's career, right? Yeah.
So nevertheless, just quickly, Dave Hopkinson and Dale Hooper, who had just, and Dale had just become the chief commercial officer of Rogers. And so I came into it at a good time when things were exploding for both of them, right? MLSE was growing and Rogers was growing. And so I've been at Ryerson now. This is my 7th year. Next year is my 25th year of teaching. I'm on sabbatical, thankfully, and I have a couple of really good projects mapped out. And then I think the only other thing to add to this quickly, in 2018, we established, after spending considerable time and a couple of years before that, the Future of Sport Lab, which is a research and innovation hub that we continue to refine. But it and
I want to pick on that. We'll come back to that for sure. That's great. And little side note, my next episode, I'm very pleased to say, will be with Dave.
Good.
Yeah, just he's I think he's still in Madrid because of the school year with the kids and COVID and all that, but he hasn't made his way maybe by now to New York for his next.
Yeah, I read that he's here actually in Toronto.
Oh, he's here now. Okay, because when I reached out last, he said he was still in Madrid at that time. So he'll be the next one. So it's the links. The industry's small, Cheri.
No, and it is, and that's part of my sabbatical. So I can tell you.
Yeah, sure. Peter, we go back the longest. When I was head of sales and marketing at WWE in the early 2000s, 2000 to about 2005. I remember coming and visiting with you and trying to convince you that we could sell more chocolate bars if you attach yourself to The Rock and to Trish Stratus and all these WWE superstars, and got to know you then and have followed obviously your career and with what you do at George Brown for the past 12 years, and been very lucky and very honored to have been invited in to speak on a few occasions there. Talk about, we share some common, mentors and aspects of our career. Talk about your journey.
And it's interesting to hear Cheri's story, because it seems like those years of 97, 98, 99, that sort of late 90s window. And I found almost the Cheri Maguire, but Jerry Maguire.
I like that though.
Cheri Maguire. Yeah.
You can run with that. You can have that. I find that interesting because at that time I was at Chris Lang and Associates, really getting my grounding as far as the macro perspective of this field as a mid-20s student of the industry and professional industry. And that movie really made it that much more sexy for sport business. And I think I agree, Cheri. I think that it's pop culture moments like that in time that have really played a role in the evolution of our entire industry. So fast rewind on me. I come from Oshawa, and I've got two parents that have been in these quasi play space. And I'll use the word play because I'm about to embark on a PhD journey with play thinking as my research, and play in the context of dad being an athletic director at a high school, football coach, basketball coach, just a real influence on sort of me being conditioned in the context of sport growing up. And then my mom, a kindergarten teacher. So it's like there was Lego on the floor, and there were hockey sticks in the garage and basketballs. And so I really grew up around play in the context of different aspects of it, from my younger years into my high school years, where I, like Cheri, followed my dream into university and was an athlete. Although I don't think, and I say this to be really couched, I don't think I was as good as you were, Cheri, as a varsity player. I was on the team, but I went to a little liberal arts university in Rochester, New York, called Robert Wesleyan, and was on a partial basketball scholarship. And it was a big deal for me because that was my goal. I'm a very goal-driven person to this day, and to make the team as a small 5'9", 3/4 point guard, shooting guard who really embraced the 3-point line, it was a really big deal for me. But
you were Steph Curry before Steph Curry.
I was.
Yeah,
I was.
Got it. Okay, noted.
But it's interesting because I've done a lot of soul searching as I've got into academia, as to sort of connecting the dots as to why I'm here. And in high school, I used to run a basketball tournament for grade 8s, and I would adjust the 3-point line to being closer in so kids could learn to shoot from a closer distance. And I'd sell sponsorship around it. And I didn't really know that was really event marketing at the time. I was just operating in my dad's classroom as being a sport enthusiast and trying to help raise money for our teams to go on trips. So finished high school, went on to university, played basketball for my first couple years, and then finished with a Bachelor of Science in Business. And very fortunate, started working not too long thereafter in the advertising world. I started at Gray Advertising as an account executive, working on P&G, and was not exposed to any context of sport, but in the back of my mind, always, as a fan, an athlete, had that interest to see how sport could play a role in helping my clients. And although those opportunities didn't emerge, and I did try with some of my clients to look at sport themed promotions, but that evolved into me staying on the agency side and going to work at Chris Lang and Associates, which at the time, and you know Gavin this quite well because you know Chris quite well, really in the mid 90s, and actually since 1968 into the late 80s and 90s, was really a prominent foundation for a lot of folks that have built their careers in this field. And I think, I knew you've had Chris on the show, and if we ever did, he was my first episode. I said to Chris, I'd be honored. I can't think of anybody better, sponsorship marketing Hall of Famer and a legend, right? Real true legend, and true legend in the context that if we ever went through the alumni that worked for that organization. Oh,
the leaders, all the leaders today.
To this day. And that for me was a real critical window of development in my understanding of utilizing sponsorship as a medium or platform to build brands, and sport being a catalyst for that. Like Cheri, that was the 97, 98, 99 sort of window. And I moved from Lang, after having some great experiences and training there, into a brand management capacity at Cadbury. And that, if you were to ask me sort of what was the big window, or what was the springboard where it all came together for me to understand from soup to nuts, the whole.
Well, you worked at Campbell's too.
And I worked at Campbell's. Funny how that happened.
Yeah, you come by that saying honestly.
I don't mean to, but there's a bit of a copywriter in me. But that moment where we became a founding partner of of Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment and their venue at the time, which was Air Canada Centre. And I was not hired for a sponsorship role, so to speak. Cadbury had brought in a lot of executives from the UK to actually head up new media platforms, and sponsorship and presence marketing at the time was one of them. But they had just done a 3-year deal with Vince Carter. They had just done a 3-year deal at the Air Canada Centre. They'd done a 3-year deal with Canada's Wonderland. And they were becoming a player as a brand in the year 2000 in that space. And opportunities emerged where they needed counsel on what was best practices to look at. And I seized the moment and had an opportunity to step right into create another role for myself. So I actually created my own job there. I was a brand manager and then became an experienced strategist. And it was a little above my head at the time, but as a young buck, I ended up being in a position where I was overseeing all the properties that Cadbury was leveraging in the sport and event sponsorship space. So it was an incredible moment where I just stepped into a leadership capacity, and really, because of Cadbury's ownership of the 4 Ps in the marketing mix, and specifically product development, and not taking dictation from south of the border, we really got to be hands-on in building activation strategy and programs, but specifically with Vince Carter. For me, that was probably, without question, hands-on co-creation of a product with, at the time, one of the top 5 most popular athletes in the world, looked after by Mark Steinberg, who is related to Lee Steinberg. It was and who oversaw 2 athletes, Mark being Tiger Woods and Vince Carter. It was a pretty amazing training experience on the job, and the coupled with the work I was able to do at Lang, and then on top that springboarded my career. And I could go on and on about what that did.
And then fast forward, and you had a couple other stops agency side, but yes. Just what was the kind of that impetus that got you into George Brown and to start that? You've been there almost 12 years now.
I have. So I'm also, and I didn't go too much in my academic background, but I'm actually a graduate of the George Brown Sport and Event Marketing program. So when I graduated in 97, after working 2 years at Gray, again, interesting time and location. Chris Lang at the time was only hiring as trainees people from the George Brown program. They would not hire outside the program. So they would take on 2 trainees each year. And I was fortunate to be one of those trainees. And so the George Brown program became a part of my DNA. Fast forward 12 years, I had the opportunity to come back and teach on a part-time level, but that then evolved into a tenured position and headship position. And it's been, where it's incredible to now actually help ground that next generation through the journey of me going full circle.
Love it. And we'll get to that. And that's the theme really today, is inspiring the next generation of sport marketing and sponsorship marketing leaders. That's a fascinating background. Vijay, we've also known each other not as long as Peter, but I think it's going on 12, 15 years. We share, you're an instructor of sport marketing at Schulich School of Business. I'm a York grad. I never did the MBA program, but that linkage, my sport marketing career, has brought you to me, and I know you invited me into network and talked to the class a few times, and we got to know each other that way. And similar to these two, Cheri and Peter, have followed your career and your path, but enlighten the listeners. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, if I had to encapsulate my journey in one word, it would probably be resiliency, and I'll get into why I could say that one word would best sum it up. So I finished my undergrad degree in urban and regional planning, which is a completely unrelated field, in 1997. So again, with the late 90s theme here. And I worked in that for about 3 years and found that it wasn't what I thought it would be. It didn't fuel my fire. So then upon hearing stories in that program about how difficult it would be to find a job, I thought, well, it'd be best for me to develop an alternative career just in case something happens. I don't want to be up the creek, so to speak. So I at that point, I'd actually amassed a lot of volunteer experience in the industry, from working at the Motor City Bowl college football game in Detroit to working with Canada Soccer on international matches here in Toronto. So I thought, okay, why not parlay that volunteer experience into a transition and a changing careers into the sports and entertainment business world. So then I thought, okay, well, with that volunteer experience, I need to add some education to that to supplement it. So I added a certificate in PR from Ryerson, then a certificate in event management from George Washington University in DC. And then the piece de resistance, I guess you could say, was finishing my MBA in 2009 from York. And interestingly, when I finished the MBA program, actually, I was actually teaching at York even before I finished the degree, which is not really allowed. But they knew I was finishing, so they gave me the opportunity to do that. And that really stemmed from just wanting to share a lot of the knowledge that came from those volunteer experiences with the students in the now defunct sports administration certificate program at York. So then the dean at the time was saying, well, why don't you apply to teach the class? So I thought, okay, well, that's not why I came to you, but sure, I'll apply for it. So I was passed over the first time, then I got the class the second time. So then when I was preparing the midterm exam for that course, I then went to the professor at Schulich, who now is the acting dean of the school, who at that time was teaching the course that I teach now. And I asked him, would you be able to help me prepare this midterm exam? I haven't done this before. He said, well, I can do that, but I'm also going on sabbatical for a year. Can you teach my class? And I thought, okay, again, that's not why I'm here. But sure, I can do that. And ever since then.
I love those little moments, right? that very innocent moment. And it just,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's, you have to take opportunities and run with them. And
right.
And I owe a lot to the school. I mean, they allowed me into the MBA program with a very minimal GMAT score. So they believed in me.
Careful, don't implicate yourself too much in this, okay? All right.
Yeah, and then at the same time, they allowed me to teach when I didn't have a lot of experience in that. So I run through the wall for that institution.
That's great.
And I've really tried to pay them back ever since for what they did in investing in me, because a lot of people earlier on in my career I wouldn't say never, but I didn't really have a mentor. Nobody really took me under their wing. Everything I achieved, I had to do it on my own with limited information. So that's where the resiliency comes in, is just kind of overcoming these challenges. So when I started teaching, I thought, okay, once I get a full-time job in the industry, which was always my goal and which still is my goal, I would leave teaching. But then I just enjoyed it so much and found out what I was achieving were things that I was very proud of. I was actually making a difference in the future lives of students. And I thought, well, I don't want to give this up. And I figured any job that I would hopefully apply for in the future would enable me to keep teaching. And if they didn't, I wouldn't take it. So while I taught, I also was still trying to achieve my primary goal of working in the industry, which still exists to this day. But unfortunately, the industry side of my career has not gone the way I would have liked. I've been restructured out of jobs more than once, through no fault of my own, but things happen. What can you do? So my career on the industry side has been a series of stops and starts, and it hasn't had the upward trajectory that I hoped it would, despite a lot of effort, despite a lot of networking. But on the flip side, I'm very proud of what I've done on the academic side, from staging the country's only sports media and entertainment career fair, which we're heading into our 6th edition coming up next Friday, to our sponsorship marketing workshop, because we believe that we need to prepare students for future careers in that industry and not have them backdoor it into that profession after having maybe worked in brand marketing.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that sponsorship marketing workshop. I think that's a good, I want to talk about your respective areas of academic focus, and that certainly is very relevant to the theme of this podcast. So that's great. Let's maybe then, and so mentorship, before we get into academic focus, and I think some of you touched on it, but, Cheri, back to you, you talked about people like Dave and Dale, but I imagine there were other influential voices in your life, that led you to kind of the successful career you've had.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to note for your audience, it is really tough as a female to get your PhD and to keep your career with a PhD. You have to, and if you want to have a family, you have to fit that in, and so somewhere. And so I say that because there's only about 10% of women who have who in this field in sport management are female faculty. The numbers are increasing, but at the time when I was doing it, I was the only one who graduated from my class that was a woman. So that being said, that probably colors some of my mentorship conversations. So I would say my mentors in this, and I don't come from a family of graduate students, let alone PhD students. So I would say my mentors are from academia and then in the industry. And so I would say in the academic space, those who were on my PhD committee were helpful. There's a gentleman by the name of Bill Sutton, who some of you may know because Bill authored the textbook that is the highest subscribed to textbook. I think we all use different ones in sport marketing. And I've been fortunate, him and a gentleman named Dave Setlur have been kind of my go-to, and both really well known. And we've built wonderful relationships with them. I think at Brock, I had two faculty that I came in to working with who kind of looked after me when I started, because building a program is tough. I would say at Ryerson, my mentors in day-to-day have been really three people. So we implemented when I started in, again, I say wholeheartedly, having the Rogers tag to my title definitely helped and opened doors. I did land on a private jet at one point. Those things were helpful, right? And it was because of that. So one of the things Ryerson did to grow exponentially with their president, Sheldon Levy, who looked after me, was a program called Distinguished Visiting Professors in. So I've worked with two distinguished visiting professors in sport business. The first was Tom Insalmi, who's a wonderful, there's no better person to work with, I think, to figure out the industry and strip away the bullshit and say, here's how you can be good and respected and maintain some humility about you. That's my 2 cents with Tom.
That's great.
Ironically, when I interned with the Grizzlies in 1995, Tom was part of Orca Bay, right? So it's ironic. He tells that story and the students are like, how old is she really? But so I would say for sure, I credit Tom and Salmone for helping build a lot of the things and helping me then. Particularly, he was coming off his time out of MLSE, so he didn't need to do anything and probably didn't want to do anything, but I still keep in touch with him. And the other one now, as you know, is you probably know is Brian Cooper. So I can't speak enough about how much he has done for me, but I am, and he probably won't listen to this, but I'm shocked all the time how much more he's doing for someone who could retire, right?
Yeah.
And he talks and mentors other people all the time. He does more than most, I would argue, than most people I know in the industry, and kind of that cadre of where he sits in that band. And then there's the third man, his name is Ralph Lean. And I don't know if you know Ralph Lean.
Know the name, but
he's a lawyer, but he's done a lot of work in the sport industry. So I would say that's where yeah. And I think I'll just add, I think as a tool or as a learning benchmark, for me, my focus has really become, where do I want to spend my time for the rest of my career, which is in kind of these industry partnerships and programs. I really look at the legacy of things. I think I've done so many years of programs that are good for the students, but I'm like, I want to stick my meat in, I want to stick the yardstick in it and do a little bit more with it. And so that's why the Future of Sport Lab and the fan study today, and we're doing an EDI project with a postdoc and a Black scholar. I'm trying to look at the longer tail of things. And so I share that because for me, my mentors now have been shaped by people who understand the industry linkages with academia. And those don't always come in your own home unit. You have to seek those people out. So I just share that as
well said. And Brian Cooper was one of I was saying earlier when Peter mentioned Chris Lang, I thought no better person to start my podcast series almost 2 years ago now than with Chris. Brian was close behind. I think Brenda Woods was my second episode, and Brian was my third. And you're right; these are people that have really shaped the industry and remain incredibly influential. So, great shout outs there, Peter. You touched on a little bit in your journey there, but you want to single out mentors?
Yeah, it's Cheri, just wowza on yours. And it's there's such an intersection between the three of us, four of us, if Gavin too. I would say at each job stop, in my private sector first, and then it's interesting because we look at the three of us, we've got different paths to where we all are in a complementary space. And I agree with Cheri. You made a comment earlier on about like way back when about like that really we all complement each other at the schools and the programs we oversee. It's not really competition. It's more complementary and collaboration. And but on the private sector side as a start, a gentleman by the name of Everett Elting, who was the chief executive officer at Gray in the 80s and 90s.
That's an advertising name.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. And it's for another podcast if you're interested, how we actually met. And I do believe in fate, and it just how it really, if I didn't meet him, I don't know if I would be where I am today. But from that moment when I was 22 years old, it springboarded me in focus.
Yeah, I'm not interested. I'm not interested at all, Peter. Yeah, but
that's not a pitch, swear to God. But it's interesting. The name lives on. So he was integral to my journey. And his daughter, Liz Elting, actually, if you Google the name, she runs the Liz Elting Foundation in New York. And
that name really rings a bell.
Quite a prominent business person in the United States, like really prominent, self-made, someone to just explore, for sure. That was really critical. And then without question, I'm going to say the Lang family, Chris, Mike, the senior leadership team that was there at that point. It's interesting, Cheri, you may know this from Brian or not. I went there, and I think Brian was there in the late 80s, because Chris would often give offices to people to help them start their businesses. And I mean, I used to sit there when I was working as a 25-year-old on the 98 Nagano games, and in would come Brian Henderson and Bobby Orr, and and Chris was sitting down one-to-one and counseling these folks on their own businesses. And I just didn't really know fully how fortunate I was to be a part of that environment. I was actually saying to Gavin at the beginning of the podcast, I've looked at some materials that I was grounded in from my training at that time, and they would work today without question. It was such a forward-thinking environment that I was fortunate to be a part of. So I would say that. And then my next move to Cadbury, that's an interesting one because that became more consumer product, packaged goods, product invention oriented in that sort of learning experience. But I would have to say in that role, specifically John Bradley, who was vice president of marketing at Cadbury at the time, now is an author, consultant, and a bit with IMG, actually not a bit, a lot with IMG in indirect ways. So Natalie Cook, who was at IMG at the time. I just missed Dale Hooper. Dale was a brand manager, group brand manager at Cadbury. He'd left to go to Frito-Lay when I got hired at Cadbury. So there's it's funny when you said Brian or Dale, Cheri, because I just missed him in my sort of start on packaged goods. And then moving on to Campbell's for almost 4 years, without question, Mark Childs, who was vice president of marketing at the time and now heads up Metrolinx, I believe. Randy Weiersberg, who was at Nike, executive director at the time. When I was
OLG now. Yeah.
And OLG now, who was at Cadbury, actually. I should have mentioned him at Cadbury. And then Phil Don at Campbell's, who, I don't know if you know the story, but Phil and Mark created the Vector program for end product themselves for Kellogg's during the late 90s, early 2000s. So they went to Campbell's, and that journey and that experience there for 4 years was phenomenal. And then going to Mark Anthony, working for an owner in hair care as a hairstylist who's built his own product line in Canada, was incredible in that regard. And then going on to Launch, which became Mosaic, and the owners there, and folks that have gone on to SDI marketing like Wilf, Mike Smith, and a couple others. So each stop had really interesting,
influential people.
It wasn't academia, but what's interesting as I bridged into academia, Pete McCaskill, who I'd certainly been in touch with throughout my career, who had started the George Brown program with a lot of faculty in the early 90s when there was no term post-grad actually at all, and partnered with Chris and other executives at the Blue Jays to create this program, was very integral to me bridging into academia. And then now, without question, the dean, Dr. Ian Austin, the dean of our school, and Elizabeth Spears have been integral to me, really to just add to what Cheri said, because this is where the college postgraduate certificate world has always been about partnership, cohesion in training students more in an applied context as to focusing on the theoretical. And I firmly believe you got to have both and to be successful. And that comes from my private sector first, now academic piece and bringing that together. And I think, and I think more and more, it's very hard to do that. And I say that because I always say to my students, you know, I've got my butt kicked on Dragon's Den. I've got my butt kicked at Walmart trying to get products into the store. And now I got to look at defending a thesis for my PhD. But they're all pitches.
But come on, right? Those are invaluable lessons. But getting your butt kicked is way more memorable than having an easy win.
I still use the video, and you're welcome to Google it. But you know, and facing Kevin O'Leary 7 years ago with a client, it was we didn't do well, and I make fun of it. But to get there and to understand the pitch process and then do
invaluable.
It was invaluable. So I now and Cheri, I'll probably be calling on you at some time about PhD counsel. I have before, but I really
just got to keep writing.
I know. Well,
there's this expression. Your PhD will be the last document you ever worked on. And you just have to remember that.
Well, I tell you, it's an interesting journey right now because I also was a copywriter at Mark Anthony. And so I can write short, I can write themed, and then I have to write long-winded as an academic. So it's quite a mix. But I think, and this will lead you to Vijay, but I really think the theory reality bridge for the industry the three of us collectively try to build needs three folks like us and yourself, Gavin, too, because you train too from your work experience. And it's not like one's better than the other. And I say that to my faculty who teach on my team, who come in as executives often saying, oh, this is going to be a cakewalk. I'm just going to motivate the student base and then off they go. And I'm like, no. You have to suspend your neutrality around or your corporate and your private sector and get into the neutral academic space, which is bridging that is not as easy as folks realize. And I think, shout out to Cheri, what she's done with this fan research study, because I didn't have access to any of that when I was in the private sector. I wanted to, but I didn't have access to any of that. I would, as I looked at private sector initiatives to build connectivity with a target audience, I didn't.
And those things, probably, Gavin, you'll pick up on it. It's about the network, right? I didn't go like that, and we all know this, and that's a lesson for the students is and what you spoke to. And sorry, Gavin, I know you're the host.
No.
But, and I think some faculty are desperately missing this in Ontario. And I say Ontario because it's a concentration and we have access to Toronto. So, but you can't just go like that and say, I'm going to partner with MLSE. MLSE. You can't do that with Rogers. And so you have to understand building the network and is part of this mentor question to you, Gavin, and the relationship. And, as I said, I've been working with Rogers.
And that's great professional development advice, right? Which we'll come back to.
You have to get to know these people in our market.
Yeah. And I would argue to build on your comment, Cheri, not just get to know, but to understand how they think. And this is where I failed to mention one last mentor Richard Petty. So when I was at MLSE, not at MLSE, but working in concert with their team at the time, which was a smaller group. But Richard had, and this is why I actually, out of all the mentors I've talked about, there's a lot of me that respects him the most in a lot of ways because he's got the blend. He's got the blend of consumer product, private sector, running a big organization, running a stadium, running teams. Yeah, they didn't win, but he set the foundation for the next evolution. And he understood the importance around, the term brand, I'd argue, was not used in the context of sport terminology until he got his team down there to think about, it's just like Green Giant, but it's this property that isn't beans, it's hockey.
Yeah.
And that portfolio.
And maybe one of the great examples being We the North, right, in more recent times, which was opposed, but he laid a foundation for, Tim Lewicki and the team ushered that in.
In the late 90s, and I'll say this to everyone, there was no business plans for NHL teams.
Yeah.
And so I came from a world that, I mean, and I can say when Gavin, you came in and you were right. It would have been a great fit with WWE. Great.
Thank you. Now you say it. Yeah.
But at the time I had my asset and I was, that wasn't the word we used, but that was my athlete.
Yeah. Let's go to, we'll come back to it, but let's go to Vijay. Vijay, mentors, who inspired you along the way?
To be honest with you, I didn't have any mentors. I didn't really understand the value of having a mentor or how to even approach a mentor, way back in the day. So a lot of what I have achieved is through my own volition, initiative, my own efforts. And that's why I try to play a role as a mentor for students now, because I understand, the pitfalls of not having a mentor or even understanding the value of one or even trying to pursue one. So I don't want people to make mistakes that I made early on in my career. So I try to help them. I don't want them to repeat kind of the struggles that I've gone through. But the one person that has really facilitated a lot of what I've been able to do is my mom. And she made a lot of sacrifices for me, ensuring that I stay healthy, taking on maybe work that I should be doing just so that I can pursue my passions. And without that, I don't know if I'd be able to do half of what I was able to do, because not having any siblings and not having a large family, it's a heavy burden to have to take on a lot of different things on your own. And so despite that, I've been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve. And, there are people that have tried to help along the way. And I've approached people in the industry on how I can improve the industry side of my career. And oftentimes, unfortunately, they would say, well, why don't you do your PhD? And I thought, well, I'm looking for assistance on being successful in the industry, not on the academic side. And, that was disappointing, because it told me that people weren't really listening to me. They didn't understand my perspective. And so that made it somewhat challenging as well. But I would say in more recent times, I think the one person that's really tried to understand my situation and sympathize with the unique challenges that I face is Jim Kozak at MediaCom.
Yeah.
Jim, he's been great in just listening to me and in meeting with me and trying to help me navigate some of those unique challenges of how do I step away from sort of the academic brand that I built and try to be perceived as more of an industry solutions provider. And that's a unique challenge that I face that a lot of other people don't have to face.
I love going back to that parent, right? That is often our greatest greatest mentor. So well said. I want to shift to and very honest answer. I liked your candor there. I thought that was incredibly refreshing. Cheri,
can I just add one piece to the mentor? And again, acknowledging women are still looking for opportunities to grow in this field and in other kind of demographics, and acknowledging this could be learning for students. I think, and this is a little bit of a theme from Vijay's, I think mentors can be people from above who have been through some of those challenges from before. But I think mentors can also be your colleagues, to Vijay's point. And so I didn't share, and we call this our best kept secret, but I don't know if you folks are aware. One of the things I was able to do with the funding I had through Rogers, and we continue this, is something we call the Loretta Lunch Club. And it's a group of about 15 women. We meet once a month now virtually, but then we meet quarterly for lunch in the city. And it includes Natalie Cook, and it includes Allison Walker and Teresa Resch and Tanya Marak, and I could go on and on. But Stacey Allister is now part of our group. And let me tell you, getting your tribe and building your cabinet, your advisors, I think is a theme I just wanted to share, and that's ours, and I could go on and on about them.
I talk about that in the training work I do about building your own ambassador club, and that's a great, that's a perfect one. And I did want that perspective from you, because I said I hate bridging it by saying it's because I'm a girl dad and I got two daughters. But I've always just leaned in. I got two sisters. I don't have brothers. So I've always just been, in tune to, just opportunities and seeing women grow in business and sport, which is a field I've mostly been in. But this importance of, if you're a young female executive, the importance of finding a female mentor, right? Who you aspire to be in that, and just getting guidance. I think is different as a woman, to find another inspirational and influential woman.
I think any group, whether it be, we look at the conversation and focus in our field on Black leadership and executives in sport. Vijay, I know you're doing some work in your community in sport.
Yeah.
I think just building a tribe. Statistics talk about how we've lost that for so long because the social media and the lunch clubs, in this country, the Empire clubs and the Canadian clubs that were so vital to that networking. We shouldn't lose all those components of getting together purposefully and having like-minded thinkers and colleagues. So I just wanted to offer that as a learning for your audience.
No, thank you. So shift to academic focus, Cheri, will stay with you. One thing that, there's so much that stands out when reviewing what you do, but something that I read, that your scholarship interest covers sport business strategy and trends, including innovation and entrepreneurship, sport and social impact, and women in sport leadership. I was hoping a little bit of a focus of our discussion on that, but there's so many ways you can go. Just talk about your areas of academic focus.
Sure. So sport marketing was my minor in my PhD, along with management and strategy. And I would say, as you pointed out, I have three main pillars, which is sport business trends, which is really innovation and looking at strategy and thinking about, here's the models to which we're established, how are they changing? And I think we'd all agree, because of this virtual displaced fan, that's a huge change to the models of the sport industry. And I don't feel it gets enough attention. We're talking, it's not the fan in North America. It was different in Europe, but the fan is so displaced from the sport experience. And that used to be at the core. We know that, we can teach that slide, I'm sure, with our eyes closed. So looking at sports strategy broadly and is an interest of mine, and marketing is the core of what I studied. A lot of that's been articulated now through the work I'm doing in innovation and entrepreneurship. So how have we become more three-dimensional, and how are problems being solved by digital solutions and entrepreneurs, and that whole field. Students have to understand the importance of, know why venture capital is so important in sport, why these ownership groups are changing, how they're changing. It's all part and parcel the same. And then, just because of who I am and what I've done, and I know that drum needs to always bang, is understanding the female sport market. And then I've always been interested in, and part of a couple of different working groups over the last few years, that's sport and social impact. So that's kind of where we talk about now. And I've just hired, and we announced in November, PhD complete postdoc in the area of looking at the EDI in sport, particularly the Black leadership experience and racism in sport. So it's his project, Richard Norman, but I'm supporting him. So. Great. And then I would categorize all my projects under those three pillars, and go from there. Sport and social impact often share the story. I was born in Johannesburg, came at a young age, but still always maintain this attachment. And one of the great moments, sporting moments and cultural moments that I watched, and my wife, who was also born there, I remember her crying watching it, was the 95 World Cup, where Nelson Mandela donned a Springboks jersey, a symbol for many, many years of apartheid, and awarded the trophy to the team. And how that event, united a country, briefly, perhaps, but inspired, I think, a longer term movement. Sport and social impact. You could have a whole separate and I think for what we do as teachers, I always include in all my courses a unit, which could be a class or two, on giving back. And the reason I do this is, this is an industry. I think we have a responsibility to say, okay, we're going to give you a toolkit and you have to be the best sport manager you can be. And we know that can be a lot of things, but to me, it's also having some humility and some social conscious and awareness. So yes, I talk about it as being socially conscious is good for business, but I'm also doing that because I want to remind them it's about the kids in Regent Park. And if we don't get that, you're not getting it. And so, another conversation, but we have a responsibility as instructors, I think,
I agree,
to keep their egos in check. And I'll just share a story. When I went to Florida State, where I really saw it, I went in 93. So you can date me or whatever. You can date I'm 29. And so.
Why is that the number? Stacy always says I'm 29. And holding. Yeah.
But I can't
Florida
talk about
State,
Seinfeld.
yeah.
I can't show Seinfeld clips in class. That really to me is when I jump the shark and people are like figuring it out. But nevertheless, I say that because when I went in 93, Florida State won the national championship. They won a Heisman and they went to the Sweet 16. And I was fortunate to also work in athletics, but also be a tutor for work done. And Derek Brooks, if you know those names, like great. Anyways, I was fortunate to be part of a cadre where they took us aside and basically said, excuse my French, don't be a jock sniffer. And I learned early on, if I wanted to be part of that group and be accepted and this is going to work, I had a class with David Falk one week and Sonny Vaccaro the next. It was a time I was so fortunate to be there. And Brett Musburger the next week because he was on campus. It was the game of the week.
Wow.
And I'm so I come from a town of 100 people, like a farmer's daughter dropped in Tallahassee, Florida. I had no idea. Anyways, my point is this: I learned early on, humility matters in this sport, in this field, and that's a whole other conversation. And we know we could strip some people away and some organizations away from that, and the pressure cooker. It never pays off the long term. So that term's
incredibly.
I reference that because that's why I always am committed to including it in what I teach, because I want them to know why Giants of Africa is important and right to play in those organizations. So thank you.
Yeah, Peter.
No, I getting excited by the conversation where it's going. I to add to Cheri's comments, and it's tough to expand that much more because she's covered off a lot of stuff, but growing up with my dad being a phys ed teacher and being in athletics and really understanding the importance of, or learning the importance of inclusiveness. And I mean, of course, we didn't use that word at that time, but us all getting along and becoming good people. And Dad would always say, and I didn't label him as a mentor, but I thought Vijay's comments were, and I was like, oh yeah, right, personal life. But Dad always, when we were on the team, it wasn't about winning. It was about how can we be the best leaders we can be when we go on to university. And I didn't quite understand that as a 17-year-old. I wanted to win basketball games and just a different psyche at the time as a high school student. But as I go on now and reflect and looking back, and also my emergence within the industry, I think where it really crystallized for me was, again, during my Lang days, but evolving to Cadbury, where it was like, we always looked at charity as not just something that was nice to have, but there needed to be something that was building the community, like in some way. That was, yes, it had to be relevant to the brand, and yes, it had to be differentiated versus other branded investments because there was a return on, emotional capital. But your comment, Cheri, about Regent Park and we have to think that way. And I think sport has for a long time. It's just not been a part of the forefront of the story, where it's now there in a heightened way, which is amazing. But my students and I were talking about yesterday, the unifying power of sport, which is making its way into every message from almost every brand at the moment right now, which is a great thing. But the only ad I would, and that was sort of just to amplify further what Cheri talked about with social consciousness and awareness, but the only ad I would say that I really try to integrally build into my students' skill set, if you will, is I really want to teach them that creativity is it's not a soft skill, it's not an add-on. but creative intelligence and that ability to be whatever we want to define it and however we want to look at it is integral to succeeding in any form of work, I would say. But it's one of those things, having worked at an ad agency early on in my career, and Gavin, you might be able to relate this too from your journey, where it was kind of in the side department. Oh, we'll get to that later. Or, oh, that's not your job. You're the business strategist. You don't write copy. Wait a minute. That's for the business guys. And I think that the notion of social consciousness, creative intelligence, adaptability, and the last one I'll add is, and Cheri alluded to this a bit, about understanding like why, capital investment firms and, the amalgamation of different entertainment companies like Disney owning ESPN, and understanding that Mickey Mouse and toys are another form of content, just like LeBron James. But bridging that divide is a tough thing to teach. I will say it's a tough thing to kind of teach, but I will add that understanding really the science and art of marketing combined, and really understanding that, and being a good marketeer first, and then understanding that application in the context of sport and entertainment is easy to put on a slide and for us to discuss. And I know the four of us do get it, but really getting folks to understand that, I think, and I'd argue this may be a part of my PhD in some ways, you have to almost work first for a bit and then connect the dots going back to understand.
Well, isn't perspectives the magic word, right?
Yeah, perspective, absolutely. So, I mean, I would just add, that piece, but sending good leaders into the industry in the world right now, I've always been about that, but I really feel now it's like, it's integral. We need people in this field.
And maybe what the definition of a leader has changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really
Good.
That understanding. Yes.
Good. Vijay, talk about what you really try and cover in the sport marketing side. I know you do tourism marketing as well, but your academic focus, what you're trying to impart to your students.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from a knowledge standpoint, I try to make sure that in the confines of 6 weeks that I cover as much on the sports marketing side as I can. So that ranges it from everything from fan engagement to brand management to licensing, merchandising to social media, digital media technology to sports marketing and its fusion with popular culture, which actually is my favorite topic. So I do a lot of research into how sports marketing practices leveraging film and TV and fashion and beauty and music and food and celebrity to generate revenue and build brands. So that's sort of a pet area of mine that I really find a lot of fascination with. But overall, when it comes to the curriculum, that's what I focus on. But for me, really, it's all about an industry-centric approach to education, and that's based on not only the knowledge that the students learn, because they need to know all of those areas, but it's also the skill development. It's the ability for them to solve a company's problems. Because as I often tell them, if you can't solve a company's problems, then what value do you bring? And 100%. You're only as good as your ability to solve a company's problems. And that's what companies are looking for. They're looking for people who can solve their complex, multifaceted problems. And that's why when I take that industry-centric approach to learning, it pervades everything that I do, from the real industry projects that the students work on. And we've worked on projects for 108 companies over the last decade, to the guest speakers that we have in the classroom, which Peter and Cheri bring in as well. So it's really all about having this industry-centric approach to learning, which also includes having workshops on sponsorship marketing or analytics or on career development and so on. It's all about preparing students for success, because we want to create that bridge between academia and the industry. We don't want them to just think that by knowing information that they're prepared. No, it's not only knowing information, but it's taking that information and solving companies' problems based on that knowledge.
Sorry, go on, Cheri. I was going to ask you just to expand on that sponsorship marketing workshop and what's involved there. Yeah, Vijay?
Yeah, I mean, I realized a few years ago that in our curriculum, we don't actually have a sponsorship marketing course, which is something that I broached with the head of the department at the time. And he said that, oh, well, it's covered in 3 or 4 different classes. And I thought, well, if you don't take any of those classes, then you're not getting it. So what will happen then is you'll have students backdooring it into the profession, and that's not going to advance the field. That's going to, if anything, result in people who maybe don't belong in sponsorship marketing getting into it somehow. And that's, the profession deserves more than that. So I thought, okay, well, since that's a deficiency and a gap that we have, I need to address that. So I thought, okay, why not have a sponsorship marketing workshop, which will really make students understand what it is. There are students who do not know the difference between a coordinator of marketing and a coordinator of partnership marketing, and that's a problem, because that means students who would be good for partnership marketing or sponsorship marketing would not go into it because they don't know what it is. They may go into brand marketing and think that's all that marketing is, or that it's in the CPG world. And there's more to marketing than just what exists in the CPG world. You could work in partnership marketing for a bank or for Canadian Tire, or whatever the case is. So the whole point
the roles have proliferated. You're right.
Exactly. So the whole idea is to make students understand what partnership marketing is, and that there are opportunities in that space, and most importantly, that it's different from brand marketing. It's not the same.
Yeah.
And they need to understand that and know what assets are, what activation is.
So a workshop runs what? Is it a day thing? Is it a multi-day session? Like, how do you structure those?
No, we schedule them during a class window of 3 hours. So we have an introduction to partnership marketing. Then we have a session on assets and activation.
So it's within the confines of that, but you really focus for a few hours on it. That's great.
And then we have a session on evaluation. Then we either have a case study, or we bring in a panel of industry experts. So it's kind of varied from year to year. Yeah.
Great. I want to segue to the second last part of our chat, which is the trends and insights, and something you've said about the blend of the arts and the entertainment and the fashion and all these things in sport. That certainly has been. You look at what NBA does with NBA crossover, but the lines between fashion and sport are blurry now. You look at sticking with the NBA, there's so much, even in the NHL, there's so much camera attention on the players walking in, right, through the building, right, and what are they wearing, and who are they listening to, and their influences. So that's certainly a trend I've noticed. It's no longer sports here, arts and culture here. There's a lot of combination. But, Cheri, do you want to jump in on trends that you're noticing or talking about to your students in the world of sports marketing, sponsorship marketing?
Yeah. And I think for me, it'll circle around that first pillar in the innovation and entrepreneurship side. I spend so much time. I would say not really a trend. It's the way the industry is now. And we look at a conversation of what's going to bring back sport. At the core, it's all talking about innovation, technologies, digital solutions. And so I would offer, while the cultural influences are without a doubt important, the fact that we talked, was it the Gucci Air Force Ones at inauguration? Did I get that right? My son has a pair of Air Force Ones, so I know what creasing is. I know what going lights to the shoes. I know what that is, but I think those are the shoes.
I wore a pair of Air Jordans my first year of basketball.
Those shoes won the inauguration.
Yeah.
I think Bernie did first. And then Bernie,
with the mittens. See, fashion, right?
Yeah. But my point is, I think for me, what I see where we have to be firmly focused is the multidisciplinary nature of sport business.
Yep.
And I say that because even constructing a research team anymore, even as a student group, you look at entrepreneurs that are really successful in startups, and when they start, and when someone gets a Series A or Series B and then exits, those teams are multidisciplinary. So we have to work. So for me, I would say we have to refocus. If I go to one other sport business meeting of academic colleagues and they all went to the same school and they all sat in an office of cubicles for 4 years, you're not getting new innovation. And it's pointing fingers and it's being critical, but who is your engineering colleague? Who is your art, radio and television colleague? So for me, the trends are definitely firmly, the industry is in innovation technology. We have to catch up. And I would say, just offer, when I started at Ryerson, we did a really thorough deep dive on what I would argue, and it's not Steve Simmons' list, thank you very much, of the most powerful people in sport in Canada. And I went to the decision makers, the people who make the business work. And without a doubt, the industry doesn't believe what we're doing in general is keeping up with the trends. And so to me, that's part of what I just shared.
Yeah. Very good. Great answer. Peter, trends?
I would add, this is going to, maybe you can go to higher level and Cheri's going to go, oh no, as an academic, but what is sport? And so I know that.
Oh boy.
Well, I'm not gonna. Okay, time out.
Yeah.
No, I'll say it in this light. Because, but we had an offline discussion about of the 4 P's of marketing built by and do they still exist, and to what context, and what's more important, and what's changed. They've all changed, and they're still changing. But if you look at, I'll just use one case. There's a ton of cases out there, but if you look at it, Red Bull created their own sport. Steel, which makes lumberjack equipment, created steel sports. Now, call it a game, reality TV content,
Esports.
whatever the hell. There's a creative gaming thingy
Gamification
in that, and it's packaged in the context of like Truck Night in America, which is a truck race. So a lot of the underpins, I believe, of sport, game, leisure. Growing up with my dad as running fundraisers to help raise money for whatever he could to get football teams jerseys and copying logos off professional teams. And then, I just look at now, and maybe it's because I've worked in, Cheri, a lot of multidisciplinary context in my career journey. So I always look to sport as a resource to use. Yeah. But when I was working at Cadbury and I went down to the factory to manufacture our Vince Carter bar, I had videos on all the lines with all the manufacturing personnel putting Rice Crisps in bars, and they were getting excited and motivated to build the product. And that was an event marketing initiative in the confines of manufacturing, but it was just positioned differently. And so I think personally that I agree with Cheri. There is some catch up, I think, a lot. However, I think the underpins of sport and the escape of creativity and hobby and that lifestyle mindset has such a role to play in innovating anything in the context of what we consume in video content, toys. I could go on forever.
Yeah.
I worked at a chocolate company. We had a factory. We saw it as a factory, but as soon as we watched Willy Wonka, it became an experience.
No, I get you.
And so there's so many things that I think if we look through a different lens, and that's where, to me, Cheri, to your point, sport and entertainment, that lens, pardon the pun, so much opportunity for innovation beyond the space of sport. I would argue a lot of product developers and other businesses need to look to sport on how they can model their businesses as much as we need to look to other businesses on how we can model sport.
Yep. Good
Well
point.
said. Vijay, trends that you're noticing?
The big one for me right now is just the evolving consumer and consumer preferences. Generation Z and then Generation Alpha coming up right after are becoming such a going concern for every stakeholder in the industry. And I kind of point to the interesting research that was done by Angelo Ruggiero's company, Sports Innovation Lab, on the fluid fan. And I found that to be a fascinating report that just came out in 2019, I believe, on how the go, play, watch pillars of the industry are all fusing to the point now where because of the blurriness that exists, fans are now not as definitive as they used to be. So there used to be the local fan, then the global fan, and now we have what's called the fluid fan. And that fluid fan is one that traverses so many different types of media, different types of product. You can generate revenue from them in different ways. So all the old models that we had in place are being upended by this fluid fan, and seeing how this fluid fan concept goes forward, driven largely by Generation Z. And then Generation Alpha is going to be really, really interesting, because from that then comes product development, various types of promotion and marketing, and then obviously the channel strategies and distribution that come with that. So I think that's really interesting. So definitely agree with Cheri and Peter on the trends that they watch. And I think if you add this one to that, then we have a pretty good picture.
Terrific. Yeah. And not surprised. Those are three of the more interesting answers to that question that I've got. Typically people are going to say, social media and esports and things like that. There's some real depth to what you all said, and I think it's incredibly insightful. So let's wrap with professional development advice. I always love to ask people who are in roles that others aspire to. In your case, also inspiring future leaders. What do you impart? What should others be thinking about doing to have a successful career in sport marketing or sponsorship marketing? Cheri?
Sure. And thank you for the opportunity to do this. It's interesting.
Yeah, that was a fun chat.
Yeah, it was great. I think don't underestimate your network. Don't underestimate that this, if you do it well, if you're doing it well, it's a long career, not short. And I say that because someone used an expression at a conference I was at, don't run too fast. Take your time, get to know people. I think I would argue both on the faculty and student side, be careful with social media. I know you want to build your brand, and the celebrity professor it's not the era I grew up in, but it's so quickly to get a following and so, or as a professional, but think thoughtfully about the fact that we are in a very small network in Canada, and everything's interrelated. So those pieces. And then I think just leave with the last points, which are always important. Think about who you are in sport, and that it does have a social obligation as well. And so those pieces that Peter and I talked about, as always thinking about who you are as not only a business person, but a socially conscious business person.
Yeah, the humanity. Yeah, Peter?
I love this discussion today, and oh my gosh, I love talking to smart people. I would say, to add, and we spent a bit of time on mentorship, but if I can expand the definition of mentorship maybe in some way, is that see every moment as an opportunity for mentorship. I've been mentored on this call. So a lot of folks are almost, I guess it's maybe, I like to think of it as the old business regime, but I like to think of the new business regime as folks being open to, not having all the answers or knowing all the perfect route to go in a career, or, in class a million times. I'm sure Cheri and Vijay have used this, the squiggly line of what success means. And I always say to my students, what is success for you? What does it look like? And so I think that's a very abstract answer, but I think the notion of mentorship being books or authors you enjoy. I'll put this out there, and I don't want to, embarrass Cheri, but I'm a relatively new academic, and my aspirations in academia have shifted since I first started teaching. And so I wouldn't have said 25 years ago I wanted to do a doctorate and, do a PhD on play-oriented thinking. I mean, that's kind of bizarre. But, it's just where I am now in my journey, and where I've looked at my strengths and my losses, my wins, using the sport analogy. And so I look at people like Cheri, and I watch and follow Vijay and to what he's done and pioneered with his course. And I've watched you, Gavin, as you've built your career. And I just think it's not thinking there's a one-size-fit-all answer for everyone, and seeing every opportunity as one to learn. And that sounds maybe very rudimentary coming from a person that had two teachers as parents, but it's really helped me. And having a learn first mindset, and in this field too, really finding ways to we all have egos, it's a human trait, but really understanding that has to be checked, and that has to be really parked. And in this field, I think because there's so much an entertainment aspect, and it's very exciting and dynamic, but really grasping the notion that we don't have all the answers, and there's always room for growth in all of us, in certain ways. So learn first mentality. And then the other piece is, I really like the point you made earlier on. I think Cheri or Gavin or I can't remember, but having that board of directors that's sort of your
we talked about it,
but also if I can use this as quickly, is not seeing it like it's always these are the 10 people and they're going to have all the answers. Really
make that fluid, right?
Yeah, and this my last point on fluid is, for example, two of my mentors, I'll say I've never met them, but I've read all their material. So David Aker, who's written some of he writes traditional marketing textbook like literature. But then someone at IDEO, like Tom Kelly, is more over here. But I get something from both to better who I am and who I'm trying to become. But Cheri definitely is an influence to me now as I look at my PhD work, for sure.
Yeah, great. Vijay?
Anytime. I will help you. I don't have to be your influence, but anytime.
No, I admire what you've done in your career. And I see now, as I go into this space even further, ways that I can learn and how I watch you and evolve.
That's cool. Hey, mission accomplished, right? Connecting people. Vijay, close us off with your professional development advice.
Yeah, I mean, I like to really err on the side, not err, but veer to the side of providing tactical advice. So rather than just going through a long diatribe of what I've done and this is what I did and when I did it, nobody cares about that because everyone's journey is different. So I like to go with more tactical advice. And what I would say is if you're trying to get into the industry, have a job search plan that's based on 5 key elements. And those elements to me are networking. So that'd be through LinkedIn and through in-person networking. Even consider creating your own job. So if you see a gap or a deficiency that exists within the company, maybe propose a position that you could fill yourself. Reading industry news and then sensing what opportunities could exist from that news. So if, say, Hamilton is bidding for the Commonwealth Games, then there's obviously opportunities that could come with that. And then pouncing on those opportunities, reaching out to the right people as early as possible. Volunteering. So that's not volunteering, say, at a local community event. It could mean trying to get onto an advisory board or getting onto a regular board. And then lastly, job postings. I'm not going to rail against those because that's how I actually got my last job. But that should be on the list, but it should not be a priority because it's not the most effective way, but it shouldn't be discounted. And then to what Cheri was saying, networking is really important. But to go along with networking, likability, I think, is really important as well too. Because if you network, but you're irritating people or people are finding you annoying with your networking, then they wouldn't want to deal with you. And that's unfortunate because that shouldn't be the case, because I think a lot of people need to understand that some people's journeys have been more difficult than others. And while some people have easily gone from job to job to job without even maybe having even applied for a job, other people haven't been so lucky. So they really need to be more empathetic and understand that people are just trying to do something better for themselves. They're not deliberately trying to annoy people or to bother people. And then lastly, I would say is just stay on top of industry development. So like what Peter was saying, you need to know what's going on in the industry, not only because you're going to be tested on it in a job interview, but also because you need to know what's happening so that you can respond to the opportunities and the challenges that come with that information to better your organization. So I think all those things will help.
Well said. And there are themes
trying to get in or already in.
Right. And there are themes of curiosity and humility and open-mindedness I picked up from what you all said. And, if you're overly confident and you think you have all the answers, right, Peter, as you said, you're going to have blind spots. Yeah. And I think that's great advice. I mean, just wonderful sage counsel from 3, really smart, insightful people. Listen, I know we could go on and on. I'm going to give you back some of your day, but thank you so much to the 3 of you. I enjoyed the chat. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks, you.
Everybody.
Thanks, Cheri. Thanks, Vijay. This is fun. Really fun.